Matthew chapter 17, the Mount of Transfiguration, has grabbed a hold of my heart and mind this morning. This isn't a unique event. The inner three are the only ones that experience it. It says in Matthew 17:1 that Jesus takes with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and the other 9 disciples stay down in the valley. These 3 travel with Jesus. He leads them up a high mountaintop by themselves, the end of verse 1. And there before them, verse 2, Jesus is transfigured. His face shines like the sun, and his clothes become as white as light. And just then, if things weren't already incredible enough, it says, just then, verse 3, there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. And I find that to be a beautiful moment. Moses was the symbol, the quintessential symbol of the law, and Elijah was the quintessential symbol of the prophets. And it's interesting to note that the entire Old Testament is referenced, referred to, and summarized with the law and the prophets. It's the reason why in Matthew chapter 5, when Jesus is in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, I've not come to abolish the law and the prophets. I've come to fulfill them. You see, the law and the prophets have shown up to speak with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. Luke's gospel even tells us that they're speaking about his coming death and his resurrection. For all the law and the prophets, we're looking forward to this moment. The moment where Jesus' ministry comes to a climactic moment, not just on a mountain, but in the very Christ events that will transform the world in the same way that Jesus is transfigured on this mountain, where the veil is pulled away and the holiness of God is radiating through everything, almost to the point where it makes it glow. Peter is so overwhelmed in this moment in verse 4 that Peter says to Jesus, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I'll put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, and we'll just sleep on the ground. It's totally fine. But Moses has this response that many of us have when we are on a mountaintop experience. Excuse me, I said Moses, but Peter. Peter has this response that many of us have on a mountaintop experience. We want to live there. We want to stay at the mountaintop. We want to build shelters, we want to pitch tents, and we want to live there because we think the mountaintop experiences is what truly interacting with God is. But the reality is, his life is not lived on the mountaintops. It is lived in the valley. Now, the thing that's fascinating to me is that this Mount of Transfiguration at the beginning of chapter 17 directly moves into a scene in the valley where the disciples are not able to cast out the demon from the boy. Because in the valley, that's where a lot of the wars occur. In the valley is where the demons attack. In the valley is where we have to struggle and at times even fail to accomplish God's mission. In the valley is where a lot of life is struggled with, endured, toiled with. And there's this ever-present temptation that as we are navigating the valley, that we long for the mountaintop. Mountaintops are not where we're able to live. Mountaintops are unique moments of grace where God comes, He meets us, reveals Himself in magnificent, radiant glory, and speaks to us words that we're able to carry us on, not just down to the valley, but through it. As a matter of fact, I love what God says to Peter. Peter says, hey, let's just hang out here. Let's live here. Verse 5, God says, it says, while he was still speaking, while Peter was still talking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my son whom I love. With him I'm well pleased. And then comes this beautiful exhortation. Listen to him. Hey, Peter, the message from the mountaintop is this. Listen to him. Listen to the Son. That when you go down into the valley, whenever you inevitably leave the mountaintop, here is the message you carry with you. Listen to the Son. Listen to him, for he has the words of life. Listen to him, because he is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Listen to him, because it is at his name and by his words that demons flee. But there's a reverse to this. Some of us take so seriously that we live in the valley and not on the mountaintop that we almost shun mountaintops altogether. That we move from one crisis moment to the next. That we move from wrestling with one demon to wrestling with the next demon, almost believing that if we are not struggling in the valley, that we are not being faithful. Shunning the mountaintops and even mocking the people that long for them or go to them. Saying, why do you go to the mountaintop as if that is where you're supposed to be? You should be in the valley. It reminds me of Mary and Martha. Shouldn't she be in here serving with me and not sitting at your feet? Listen. What I love about chapter 17 is that we have a valley wrestling sitting right next to a mountaintop experience. And with eyes to see and ears to hear, we see that in both of these places, God meets us. He moves towards us in his grace to help us deal with the demons we are wrestling with, that we cannot seem to cast out. But he also meets us in our foolishness on the mountaintop. And he graciously gives us direction, which sounds something like this. Listen to him. Listen to him. Listen, I don't know where your heart is right now. I don't know if you are wrestling in a valley and you are struggling with all kinds of demons you don't know what to do with. But let me tell you this. It's okay to retreat to a mountaintop. It's okay to pull back and to experience an intimacy with God that offers you a message that can carry you through the rest of the valleys. Let me just tell you this. In the valley, it's okay to long for the mountaintop. But if you're on the mountaintop right now, let me tell you this. You need to return to the valley. You need to return to the valley because that is where life is lived. We live life between the mountaintops. We live life in the valley of the shadow of death, but we do not have to fear the evil when we leave the mountaintop, for he will be with us. What our task is, and what I want you to wrestle with this week, is whether you're in the mountaintop or in the valley, how are you positioning yourself to listen to him? To listen to him. The words of life, the word become flesh, the transfigured Christ, who casts out demons, fulfills the law, and pursues you. I love you guys. I'll talk to you next week.